Hi guys, welcome to this video. Maybe the first ever recording you've watched of a college professor in her living room. You can see that I live somewhere and have houseplants and books that I'm rather messy. And that sometimes when I record videos, I eat blue candy. So if you catch a glimpse of my teeth or tongue, you notice that they're blue. Only the healthiest for the baby, right? So, what this video is designed to do is just talk to you guys about the Sperry Grauerholz article, which is officially titled The Pervasiveness and Persistence of the Feminine Beauty Ideal in Children's Fairy Tales. We'll talk in just a second about why that title is so long. But really, we just ran out of time to talk about this article in class, and there were some really important things that I wanted to point out to you guys that I felt I would have been really remiss in not pointing out, particularly because this is a type of article known as a scholarly article, and throughout your college careers, you're going to come up against scholarly articles quite a lot. And they're important. You know, you need to read them, you need to use them for research. So I wanted to talk to you about, what makes it a scholarly article, but I also wanted to just talk to you about the reading itself and what is going on in it to help you understand it a little bit, to help you digest it, we say. So the video is going to be organized a bit by what I want to do and when. So there will be a part 1, part 2. Part 1, I'm going to be talking about the reading itself, like what is going on in the reading to make sure that you guys comprehended it fairly well. So we'll be talking about what the authors were after, what they wanted to know. Then I'll be talking about what their thesis and main points are. You might be thinking yourself what you think their thesis and main points are to see if what you thought matches what I thought. And lastly, I'll be talking about what makes this a feminist text. So for the thesis and main points, I'll be doing a little bit of a walkthrough the reading. And then part 2, I want to talk about what makes this a scholarly text, what makes it a scholarly article. And that involves like doing another walk through it to talk about the different components of what makes it scholarly. Most scholarly articles are going to have the same basic components, and I'll also be talking to you guys about what the difference is between scholarly and popular sources and why you really want to use scholarly works in your papers as much as you can. And there's a bonus feature at the end of the video that talks to you about how to use Sperry Grauerholz in paper 2 if you choose to do a feminist analysis of Beauty and the Beast or The Little Mermaid. Okay, so let's roll. What did Sperry Grauerholz want to know? One of the things that will help you most when getting through a difficult reading is looking at the title. The title tells you quite a lot. So I can look here and see that this is much of the question that Sperry and Grauerholz were trying to answer. So if I were to convert this title into a question, it would be, in children's fairy tales, is there a pervasiveness or a persistence of the feminine beauty ideal? And so if I break that down a little bit, pervasiveness means that something is pervading or it's flowing through something quite a lot. So we might say, for example, during the spring and summer in the Kentuckiana area, allergies are very pervasive. Persistence is not just like pervasiveness, it's something insists on being there. Like it's kind of hard to shake it, hard to get it to go away. Feminine beauty ideal is this idea that a society might have that women are supposed to try to attain to a certain standard of beauty. they're supposed to be beautiful, and beautiful in certain ways, or else they're no good. Like they haven't fulfilled their duty as women, right? And they're asking, is this ideal pervasive and persistent in fairy tales? So they're looking to answer that question, and they're doing so, you might notice, in a really quantitative way, meaning they actually talk about how they went through and counted instances of the use of beauty, feminine beauty versus masculine beauty, like a male being referred to as handsome. They went through and counted different tales to see if they could find whether or not this feminine beauty ideal is pervasive and or persistent. You kind of get from the title that they do think it's pervasive and persistent, this beauty ideal. Otherwise, they wouldn't title it that. They wouldn't say the pervasiveness and persistence of the feminine beauty ideal. So that's basically what they're talking about. They want to know how women are portrayed in fairy tales. Is there an expectation that women should be beautiful? Another interesting question they're looking at is whether there's a connection between beauty and goodness. So are the beautiful women in fairy tales the good ones? Are the beautiful girls the good ones? Are the ugly characters the bad ones, right? Is ugliness associated with villainy? And they're also talking a lot about something called normative social control. Normative social control basically means a way of controlling women, like getting them to behave, not get too wild, not get too rowdy, by exposing them to certain standards that society thinks they should hold to. The idea is that if you tell women they have to be beautiful, if you tell women they have to be kind and good and virtuous, things that we don't necessarily tell males quite as much, especially young boys as they're growing up. If you tell women you have to be X, Y, Z, it's kind of a way of controlling them in society, and making that look normal. So Baker, Sperry, and Grauerholz are looking to see whether normative social control is happening in fairy tales, whether fairy tales are being used to try to get young girls, like children, to send them early messages about how they should behave and whether they should be beautiful, whether they should be good. Okay, so through counting, basically through going and finding how persistent this beauty ideal, like this idea that women should try to have a certain standard of beauty, they found that this is present in fairy tales. Like, it's there. That's pretty much their thesis. Like, yeah, there are a lot of messages about feminine beauty in fairy tales. Typically, they found when a girl is good, when a woman is good, like not a villain, she must also be beautiful. That when a woman is ugly, her ugliness is part of her evil, right? It's part of her villainy. Interesting stuff. Their thesis, I think, comes in several places, but I think it's clearest, or one of the places where it's clearest, is on page 723 in the second full paragraph. It says, "We suggest," and we means the authors, Baker, Sperry, and Grauerholz, and I'm referring to them by their last name. You should pick up on that. They say, "We suggest that this emphasis on a feminine beauty ideal may operate as a normative social control for girls and women in fairy tales." They don't say in fairy tales, but that's what they mean. So they're saying that there's a lot of emphasis in fairy tales on feminine beauty, and we think this operates as a kind of social control. It's a way of getting the message out to little girls and women early on, saying you have to behave this certain way or you're like not really feminine. You're not really a woman. So if I go through quickly, because I see that I'm running out of time, if I go through quickly and look at some of the main points that Baker, Sperry, Grauerholz are saying. I'm looking on 7-11. They're telling you about what the study focuses on the bottom. I'm looking at 7-12. They tell you exactly what the study investigates, the extent to which the feminine beauty ideal has persisted over nearly 150 years in fairy tales, but namely in the Grimm tales. You should have gotten that they focus mostly on the Grimm fairy tales. They talk on the bottom of that same page, 7-12, about how, in the case of the beauty ideal, women who achieve a high degree of attractiveness are psychologically and socially rewarded. There's that idea that that women who behave themselves are rewarded, and women who don't are somehow punished. That definitely plays out in fairy tales, they think. On 7-13, they talk about how in the study they, quote, explore whether the beauty ideal has diminished, intensified, or remained stable over time. And they're also looking for whether certain tales that are particularly heavy on the good girls are beautiful, being beautiful is important, like that message, they're looking at that over time to see if it increases, but they're also looking at it to see if, like, how do I put it? They're also looking at that to see if it's responsible, like emphasis on feminine beauty is responsible for whether or not fairy tales persist over time. Like, do the stories with more emphasis on beauty remain more popular over time? And they found that they kind of do. Like, the stories with a lot of emphasis on beauty, on feminine beauty, they stick around. And another interesting thing that they seem to be finding is that in periods of like special progressiveness, where women are really starting to get equal footing with men, you find that these messages are particularly heavy, which is interesting. These messages of the feminine beauty ideal. Other important main points are found on 7-14, where they're talking about how messages in the media, so basically anything you can read or watch is the media, those messages change over time. And it's been found that children's media is particularly powerful for carrying messages about like messages containing normative social control. I kind of want to keep going, but I have to slow down. Those are some of the main points that you guys should be getting from Baker, Sperry, and Grauerholz, the main things that they're finding. All right, so what makes this a feminist text? What makes it a feminist text is that it examines not just the relationship between men and women. There's a little bit about that in there, but it pays special attention to how women are treated in a certain type of literature, which is to say how women are treated in fairy tales. If it weren't spending so much time talking about women in particular and how they're held to the standard of beauty in fairy tales, and if it weren't emphasizing that women being held to the standard of beauty, if it weren't implying that that's kind of unfair, that women are expected to be so beautiful, to do so much, to take care of themselves, to dress up, to wear makeup, to be lovely inside and out, then it wouldn't be feminist. If the discussion were equal between men and women, maybe it wouldn't be feminist. But the fact that it takes on gender at all, like femininity, makes it feminist for sure. Okay, so that's part one. Part one was supposed to be like 8 minutes. I'm at about 14 and a half minutes. So I'm gonna make the walk through quite quick. So what makes this scholarly? Certain components make up a scholarly article. There are certain things you can look for to determine if something is scholarly. I'll save that for last. I'm going to go kind of in reverse order from what I had planned. The difference between scholarly and popular articles, that's one thing I wanted to talk about. Popular articles is stuff you can just Google. Like, if I wanted to find something kind of like this article, I kind of wouldn't through a Google search, or I might, but my search terms themselves would have to be really scholarly, right? If I wanted to learn about like how beauty is mentioned in fairy tales, I could Google beauty fairy tales, and I'd get like a bunch of .com articles probably. And those are written by writers, and some of the writing is pretty good. The ideas are often pretty solid, not always, but often. But it's usually kind of like people who've been hired by these websites to write. These websites aren't paying these people a whole lot of money. Not that scholars get paid a lot of money either, but I mean, these people are kind of just writers for the website. They're not experts in what they're writing about. So if I were to go and Google fairy tale villains, pretty much anything, like any search that I hit and any article I read from that search, it'd be filled with okay ideas, but they wouldn't be the best ideas I could find. They wouldn't be the most sound ideas I could find, because they're not written by experts, basically. And these people have not been put through the ringer to write this article. It might just be some Joe Schmo's good ideas about a Disney villain or a set of Disney villains, right? I'm not going to get anything well researched. I'm not going to get anything from an expert, probably. I'm not going to get anything really juicy, right? I'm just going to get like the surface of someone's thoughts on the subject I've looked for. And it's easy. Popular article searches are easy. Now, scholarly searches are harder because they're way more specific, and you have to look in very specific places for them. You might notice if you go to scholar.google.com, it'll ask you to pay for some of these articles. So popular articles tend to be free, and scholarly articles, sometimes you're asked to pay for them. The reason you're asked to pay for them is because the people writing them are scholars. Like, their job is to do research, and the way for them to make money is to get paid for having done that research, to get paid for having written these articles. Baker, Sperry, and Grauerholz were possibly paid, but if they weren't paid, then their research is being used and respected by other people. So they get respect in their field. So typically people writing a scholarly article, they're experts in that field. They're experts on that subject. Now, how can a publication, like how can a magazine or a journal determine that these women are experts? Well, they do the work for it. Like people who sit on panels, people who judge basically whether something is worth publishing, they look at whether the authors have really done their research. They look at where these authors come from. Are they experts in their field? They look at the quality of the article itself to determine whether or not the people creating the article really knew their stuff, and whether or not this article is worth publishing. So people who publish scholarly articles, they are really put through the ringer. It's hard to publish a scholarly article. Very, very hard. But if you do, you're very well respected for it. Scholarly articles aren't just published, boom, up on the internet, and it's there for all to see. They usually publish through journals and through magazines that specialize in certain fields, like child psychology, or in this case, we'll look in just a second, but Baker, Sperry, Grauerholz was published in Gender and Society, the journal Gender and Society. So that's the difference between scholarly and popular sources. Scholarly sources you usually discover through like scholarly websites, through journal websites, and you often have to subscribe to the journal or pay for it, the article itself. So what's really cool about going to school, college, one of the things is that you usually have access to your college's library. In this case, Ivy Tech's virtual library. And you can go through and get thousands upon thousands of scholarly articles, basically for free, like your tuition dollars help pay for it. Okay, so why do you want to use scholarly sources? You want to use scholarly sources because they're more respected, because they're from experts, because they have a bunch of research in them, they're really carefully done, and because they're not easy to come by. So you know they're going to be higher quality. Popular sources, again, it's just like, some guy said a thing about a fairy tale. Not that exciting. Okay, so scholarly. How do you determine if it's scholarly? First off, where'd you find it? Did you find it boom on the internet? Or did you find it in like a magazine or a journal or something like that? In this case, if I'm looking at Baker, Sperry, Grauerholz, I'm looking at Sage. Sage collects journals. Some of you guys are referring to this as the Sage article. There's no the Sage article. There are thousands upon thousands upon thousands of Sage articles. So Sage is like a database that collects these articles. It's right here. This information that you'll often find before you really start the article tells you the title, who wrote it, and where it's found, source. Right next to source, you see Gender and Society. That is the name of the journal where this was published. So you know that anything published in Gender and Society is going to have to do with, surprise, Gender and Society. Next, you see a volume and an issue number, which means, it's published multiple times a year, basically, most likely. And then we get a page range and a publication date. All of these things you can use when you go to do the citation, okay? And references should have a link if you're ever unable to get back to this. So you have like a page that kind of looks like this when you print it out with all of this publication information. You will not get that with a popular article. Okay. The title is usually long. Academic titles are long. And the reason that they're long is because they really have to thoroughly explain what they're going to be writing about, or there's a chance you may not read the article. They want you to read the article. We have our authors. Usually authors come out of a college. So we have Western Illinois and Purdue. So these chicks, Lori Baker Sperry and Liz Grauerholz, came from, so they're probably researching at these institutions. Okay, here you have something called an abstract, A-B-S-T-R-A-C-T. Pretty much any scholarly article is going to have an abstract. It has to have this about 250-word description of what the article is about. What's great about abstracts when you're doing research is if an article has one, you get to read what it's about, like before you even read the article itself, to determine whether or not it's going to be useful for your research. And then usually underneath the abstract, you're going to have a keyword search. So these are keywords that you can use if you're interested in the article. These are keywords you can use to search further articles just like it. It's kind of brilliant. Okay, so let's do a quick walkthrough. Typically, scholarly articles are labeled. They're sectioned off. And you're going to see some sections, like some section titles repeat, but sometimes the section titles get kind of specific too. You're always going to have an introduction. It's not always labeled as an introduction, but if it's starting off the article, it's an introduction. So got your introduction here, and then when we get onto page 712, we see the social significance of feminine beauty. So they wanted you to know something about that topic. And then the importance of children's literature. So they feel like there are some topics they have to touch on before they tell you what their findings are. In other words, what their research has found. We get into 7:15, and now I'm looking at data and method. Data and method might also be known as methodology. So the word method with O-L-O-G-Y at the end. Methodology tells you how the authors went about their research. What did they do to get their data? And they have to be really, really specific about that. What steps did they take to get their data? In the case of Baker, Sperry, Grauerholz, they surveyed a bunch of different fairy tales and had some questions they were asking. So pretty much any research article is going to have a data and method or a methodology section. It's also going to have a findings section. Findings just means, okay, here's what we found. We did all this research, here's the method we used, and here's what we found. So findings is really awesome for when you're not able to read a whole scholarly article. You can go straight to the findings and find out what the authors found out when they did the study. So they talk here, there's a subheading, physical appearance and beauty in fairy tales. So just by reading these few paragraphs here, you can find out quite a lot. Then we get the tables. The tables got kind of confusing, I know, but you should know that N stands for the average number of fairy tales that these women are looking at, and SD stands for standard deviation, and I wrote down a quick definition for standard deviation. It's used to show in numbers, using numbers, like how close to the average something is. So if there's a high standard deviation, that means that the findings deviated or changed a lot from the number that was looked at. If it's low, it means that the number that is being looked at is really close to the average. So if there's a low standard deviation, it means that the number that the authors are looking at didn't change a lot from the average. So that means that they found something, like eureka. If it's a really high deviation, like if SD is really, really different from N, for example, it means that they didn't find, like if there's a lot of deviation, it means that they didn't find very much that to support what they thought. So when we're looking at this table, what you should actually be seeing is that when it comes to women's appearance, women's beauty, etc., actually references to beauty, any kind of beauty in general, there's not a lot of deviation between N and SD, which means that they're finding a lot of connection in fairy tales and feminine beauty. So if that part got kind of confusing, you should know that authors will give you these tables and they'll discuss the numbers, but they always have to tell you what the numbers mean. So if you're ever reading a scholarly article and you're really confused about the number stuff, the quantitative stuff, don't worry about it. Just look for where they tell you what those numbers actually mean. Okay? So we keep getting sections about their findings. The findings section is pretty long because they want to prove something to you. That's where they're proving something. And then pretty much every article is going to have a discussion and conclusion where they just wrap up. And in that conclusion, you're probably always going to get something about suggestions, like on page 723. You're probably always going to get suggestions about what other people can do with this study. And you're probably also going to get a discussion of limitations, like what the study did not cover and what it couldn't cover because it was covering something else. So it's almost suggesting to other researchers, hey, read our article and then see what else you can do with it. So it's almost like a cool thing about scholarly articles is like they're like inviting anybody reading to take up the work of the article and to continue it. And on that note, I should point out, all throughout the article, all over the place, I bet you noticed, it's flooded with references to other authors. Lorber, 1994. Zipes, 1988b. Curry. Yep. 1997. All over the place, we get references to other authors. That's Liz Baker, or Lori Baker Sperry, and Liz Grauerholz, the authors. That's them using other research to do their research. If you didn't see that, it would mean they didn't do much research, and that is bad. So they're supposed to show you all of this research that they've done. Anytime you see another author's name, you see them citing. It's their citation, and you notice it's in APA, actually. Many, 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 many scholarly articles are in APA format, not MLA or anything else. So yeah, they're referencing other authors to show you, like, we drew on other authors' work and we're giving credit to them. You're going to see that a lot. And then at the end, just like you have to create a works cited for your papers, they create an APA, what's called a references page, where every single author that they referred to in their paper, they're mentioning here in more or less APA format. Okay, so, this video is supposed to be 15 minutes and it wound up being 31. I'll make the questions really, really simple. Like, what did you learn? What did you get out of this, basically? And that'll be it, guys. I'll make it. I'll make the assignment far shorter than the video itself, the completion of it, that is. I hope you got a lot out of it. Bonus material, how to use this in paper 2. I would go into the introduction, or I would go into the findings or the conclusion section, and I would find an interesting point that Baker, Sperry, and Grauerholz make about the feminine beauty ideal, and I would apply it either to beauty in Beauty and the Beast, or I would apply it to the mermaid in The Little Mermaid. Find a quote that you think describes how the mermaid or how beauty is being treated in paper 2. And that'll give you a feminist discussion, pretty much. You won't even have to use the word feminist unless you want to. Okay, that's all I got. I hope, even though this video has been extraordinarily long, you know I'm a talker by now if you don't know anything else. But I hope that it's been really, really helpful for you guys, and that you've understood really well what the article was about, even if there were some parts that were sort of muddy to you. And I also hope that you understood what makes it scholarly and feel encouraged to seek out scholarly work in the future. All right, that's it, guys. Thanks for watching.